The day the giant aliens arrived started like any other morning in New York City. Sarah Chen was wiping down the counter of her small coffee shop when the first shadow fell over the city. Looking up through her shop window, she saw it, a massive spaceship blocking out the sun. It was bigger than any building she had ever seen. People outside started screaming and running. Cars crashed into each other as drivers forgot about traffic lights. Phones buzzed with emergency alerts. But Sarah just stood there, gripping her cleaning cloth tightly. She had spent her whole life building this coffee shop, and she wasn't going to abandon it. They're called the cracks. Someone shouted as they ran past her window. The military says they're 12 feet tall. More ships appeared in the sky. They were dark metal and looked like giant arrowheads pointing down at the city. Sarah watched as smaller ships started flying between the buildings. Her hands were shaking, but she still didn't run. I didn't survive 2 years of COVID lockdown just to let aliens scare me away, she muttered to herself, continuing to clean. She had always dealt with fear by keeping her hands busy. The streets outside were almost empty now. Only police cars and military vehicles remained, their sirens adding to the chaos. Sarah was about to finally close up when she heard it. Heavy footsteps and what sounded like painful breathing. The bell above her door rang as something huge pushed its way inside. Sarah's mouth fell open as she saw what it was. A cracks warrior was standing in her cafe, having to bend down to fit through the door. It was exactly as the report said, 12 feet tall, with gray-blue skin and armor that looked like it was made from black metal. But something was wrong. The alien was holding its side, and a strange blue liquid was leaking between its fingers. It was bleeding. The warrior's 4 eyes. Yes, 4 eyes, locked onto Sarah. She could run. She should run. Everyone else had run. But Sarah saw something in those alien eyes that stopped her. Pain. Fear. The same thing she saw in her customers' eyes when they were having a really bad day. "You're hurt," Sarah said slowly, pointing at the warrior's wound. She knew it probably couldn't understand English, but sometimes tone was more important than words. The alien warrior made a rumbling sound and took a step forward. Its movement knocked over a chair, making Sarah jump. But she still didn't run. Instead, she pointed to one of her larger chairs. "Sit," she said clearly, miming the action. "Sit down before you fall down." The warrior seemed to understand. It carefully lowered itself onto 2 chairs that creaked under its weight. Sarah quickly grabbed her first aid kit from behind the counter. It was meant for small cuts and burns, not alien wounds, but it was better than nothing. As she approached with the kit, she could hear military vehicles getting closer. The warrior tensed, its hand moving to a weapon on its belt. But Sarah just shook her head and held up the first aid supplies. "Let me help," she said softly. "I don't know if this will work on your biology, but we can try." The warrior watched her carefully as she opened an antiseptic wipe. When she reached toward its wound, it grabbed her wrist. Not roughly, but firmly. Sarah stayed still, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I'm not your enemy," she said, looking directly into its 4 eyes. "I just want to help." Something changed in the warrior's expression. It slowly released her wrist and moved its hand away from its wound. Sarah nodded and began cleaning the blue blood away as gently as she could. The warrior made a sound. Not quite a word, but somehow Sarah knew it meant thank you. Outside, the military vehicles were getting closer. Helicopters thundered overhead. The whole world was panicking about the arrival of these alien warriors. But in a small coffee shop in New York City, something unprecedented was happening. A human and a cracks warrior were proving that kindness didn't need translation. What Sarah Chen didn't know yet was that this simple act of compassion would change the course of human history. The story of the cafe owner and the warrior would be told across 2 species for generations to come. But right now she was just focused on stopping the bleeding. The blue blood on Sarah's floor was starting to glow in the dark. She hadn't expected that. But then again, she hadn't expected to be bandaging an alien warrior in her coffee shop either. The warrior watched her work with all four of its eyes, each one a different shade of gold. "I'm Sarah," she said, pointing to herself. Then she pointed to the Sarah's Coffee Corner sign on the wall. "This is my shop." The warrior touched its chest with 3 fingers in what seemed like a formal gesture. "Vexthor," it rumbled, its voice sounding like distant thunder. The name made the cups on the nearby shelves vibrate. Sarah smiled. "Vexthor," she repeated, though her human voice couldn't quite capture the deep resonance. "Would you like some coffee?" Vexthor tilted its massive head, confused. Sarah held up a coffee bean and pretended to drink. The warrior's top 2 eyes widened while the bottom 2 narrowed, an alien expression she couldn't read. Without waiting for an answer, Sarah started brewing coffee in her largest container, a soup thermos that might be big enough for 1 crack-sized drink. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves, even as military vehicles rumbled past outside. The rich smell of coffee filled the air. Vexthor's nostrils, all 4 of them, flared. The warrior leaned forward, nearly falling off the 2 chairs it was balanced on. "Careful." Sarah steadied the chairs. "You're still hurt." Vexthor reached into a pocket in its armor and pulled out something that looked like a glowing crystal. It spoke into it, and a mechanical voice translated. "This smell, it awakens memories." Sarah's eyes widened. "You have a translator." The warrior nodded, then winced in pain. Through the translator, it explained, "Limited power, must save for important words." Sarah poured the coffee into the thermos and carefully handed it to Vexthor. The warrior's massive hands dwarfed the container, making it look like a tiny cup. What happened next would later become famous across both Earth and the Crack's homeworld. Vexthor took 1 sip of the coffee, and all 4 eyes began to glow bright gold. The warrior stood up so quickly it knocked both chairs over. "Delicious," the translator boomed, making Sarah jump. "Like sacred drink of ancient times, lost to my people generations ago." But the excitement was cut short. Vexthor's wound started bleeding again, and the warrior stumbled. Sarah rushed forward without thinking, trying to steady a being 3 times her size. Somehow, she managed to help Vexthor sit back down. "More careful," she scolded, checking the bandages. "Though I'm glad you like the coffee." Vexthor used the translator again, but this time the warrior's voice was serious. "Must warn. Others coming. Not peaceful like me. They want." The translator's light flickered and died. Sarah felt her heart sink. They'd want what? What's coming? But before Vexthor could answer, bright spotlights suddenly flooded through the windows. A voice on a megaphone shattered the quiet. "This is the United States military. We AAVDETCTEDAKRAX life form in DA building. EXCT with your hands up." Vexthor stood again, this time more slowly, reaching for its weapon. But Sarah stepped between the warrior and the window. She remembered how Vexthor had trusted her to help, how the warrior's eyes had lit up at the taste of coffee. This wasn't just an alien anymore. This was her customer, maybe even her friend. "There has to be another way," she said firmly. "And I think I know how to save us both, but you'll have to trust me." Vexthor looked down at her, then at the empty coffee thermos, then back at her. Slowly, deliberately, the warrior performed the same 3-fingered gesture from before. Sarah now understood. It was a sign of trust. She just hoped her crazy plan would work. Because right now, in her small coffee shop in New York City, Sarah Chen might be the only thing standing between peace and war. And she was definitely going to need more coffee. Sarah's crazy plan turned out to be surprisingly simple. She led Vexthor through her coffee shop's basement. What the military didn't know was that New York's older buildings were connected by a maze of underground tunnels. As the owner of a historic coffee shop, Sarah knew them all. "Watch your head," she whispered, though she didn't need to. Vexthor was already crawling on hands and knees, the warrior's armor scraping against the tunnel ceiling. The blue blood from its wound left a faint glowing trail behind them, like bioluminescent breadcrumbs. Above them, they could hear the heavy boots of soldiers storming through her shop. Sarah tried not to think about what they were doing to her carefully arranged coffee cups and freshly baked muffins. Vexthor's translator crystal suddenly flickered back to life, casting eerie shadows on the tunnel walls. "Must reach ship," the mechanical voice said. "Hidden. Central Park. Central Park." Sarah almost laughed. "You hid a spaceship in the most famous park in New York. Best hiding place," the translator crackled. "Your people think it just art installation." Now Sarah did laugh. She had walked past what she thought was a weird modern art piece just yesterday. A massive black metal structure that appeared overnight. "You're telling me New Yorkers just accepted a random spaceship as modern art?" "Your city's strange place," Vexthor rumbled through the translator. "People take pictures with ship, say very meaningful." Their moment of humor was cut short by a new sound, a deep threatening hum that made the tunnel walls vibrate. Dust and small pieces of concrete rained down on them. "More ships," Vexthor said grimly. "War faction. They." The translator died again, but this time Sarah saw real fear in all four of the warriors' eyes. They emerged from the tunnel system into an abandoned subway station. Sarah's phone still worked underground, and the news headlines made her blood run cold. "Hostile KRIX ships in tearing atmosphere. Military mobilizing in all major cities. Mysterious blue trails spotted in Manhattan. They're tracking your blood," Sarah realized. "We've been leaving a glowing trail right to us." Vexthor nodded gravely, then did something unexpected. The warrior reached into another armor compartment and pulled out what looked like a glowing blue cube. Through gestures and the few words remaining in the translator's power, Vexthor explained. It was a peace offering from the Crack's leadership, proof they wanted diplomatic relations, not war. But the war faction had other plans. They wanted to prove humans were too violent to join the galactic community, and capturing a human helping a Crack's warrior would give them perfect justification to attack. Sarah looked at her phone again. Social media was exploding with pictures of the art installation in Central Park. People were gathering around it, taking selfies, completely unaware it was a real spaceship. Then she saw something that made her heart stop. In the background of one photo, barely visible, were several massive shapes moving through the trees. More Crack's warriors, but their armor was red instead of black like Vexthor's. "The war faction," she whispered. "They're already there." Vexthor tried to stand up straight in the low ceiling of the subway station, armor cracking against concrete. The warrior's wound was still glowing, but now Sarah saw something else glowing too. Determination in those four golden eyes. Sarah pulled up the subway map on her phone. "We're 2 stops away from Central Park. Your ship is surrounded, the military is hunting us, and we're leaving a glowing trail wherever we go." She looked up at the massive alien warrior who had stumbled into her coffee shop and somehow become her friend. "Still trust me?" Vexthor's translator sparked one last time. "Always." Sarah grinned. "Good, because I have another crazy plan. But first," she pulled 2 things from her backpack, a thermos of coffee and a bottle of bleach she'd grabbed from her shop's cleaning supplies. "The coffee is for courage," she said, handing the thermos to Vexthor. "The bleach is to clean up that glowing blood trail. And my plan." She pointed to an old maintenance vehicle abandoned on the subway tracks. "We're going to borrow that service cart, drive it through these tunnels at full speed, and create the biggest distraction New York has seen since the Spider-Man musical." Vexthor looked at the tiny maintenance cart, then at the thermos of coffee, then back at Sarah. The warrior made a sound that Sarah realized, with surprise, was laughter. Above them, 2 worlds were on the brink of war. But in an abandoned subway station under New York City, a human and a Crack's warrior were about to attempt something either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. The maintenance cart was never designed to carry a 12-foot alien warrior. Then again, the New York subway system was never designed to host an intergalactic chase scene. Leon left, Sarah shouted as she took another turn at dangerous speed. Vexthor, somehow crammed onto the tiny cart with legs dangling off the sides, shifted its massive weight. The cart's wheels screamed against the rails, shooting sparks into the darkness. Behind them, military flashlights bounced off the tunnel walls. Above them, the rumble of hostile crack ships made dust rain from the ceiling. And in front of them, "Incoming train," Sarah yelled. The approaching subway train's headlights filled the tunnel. Sarah counted the seconds in her head, a trick she'd learned timing perfect coffee pours. Just before impact, she yanked a lever she'd spotted earlier. The maintenance cart lurched onto a service track, barely missing the passing train. Vexthor made a sound that might have been a prayer in the Cracks language. The warrior was still clutching the now empty coffee thermos like a good luck charm. "You okay back there?" Sarah called over her shoulder. The translator crystal flickered weakly. "Prefer space battle." Sarah laughed, but stopped when she saw what was ahead. 3 different tunnel paths. She had seconds to choose. "Which way leads to Central Park?" she muttered, trying to remember the maze of tunnels under Manhattan. Suddenly, Vexthor's 4 eyes all focused in different directions. The warrior grabbed Sarah's shoulder with one massive hand and pointed up with another. Through a grate in the tunnel ceiling, they could see something remarkable. Coffee cups, hundreds of them, stuck to the ceiling of what had to be a basement storage room. Sarah recognized her shop's logo. "We're under my coffee shop again." She'd made a huge circle in the tunnels. "But how did you smell?" Vexthor's translator managed. "Coffee, strongest smell in galaxy." Before Sarah could respond, the maintenance cart's engine made a horrible grinding sound and died. They were stuck directly under her coffee shop, with both the military and hostile cracks closing in. "Up," Sarah decided. "We need to go up." Using Vexthor's incredible strength and some old pipes as a ladder, they managed to break through into Sarah's basement. The warrior's wound had almost stopped glowing now, thanks to the bleach, but Vexthor was moving slower. The injury was getting worse. They could hear voices above, soldiers searching the shop, but Sarah was smiling. "Remember how I said New Yorkers are weird about art?" she whispered. "Watch this." She pulled out her phone and posted on social media. "Breaking. Famous alien art installation in Central Park, actually just an advertisement for new coffee shop chain. So disappointing. Real art happening now at Sarah's Coffee Corner." "What doing?" Vexthor asked without the translator, which had finally died completely. "New York's greatest superpower," Sarah explained. "We hate being tricked by corporate advertising." Within minutes, they could hear the crowd outside her shop growing angry. People who had taken selfies with the art installation were posting furious comments. The soldiers upstairs had to deal with increasingly hostile New Yorkers demanding answers about corporate manipulation of the art scene. In the confusion, Sarah led Vexthor to a hidden door, an old Prohibition-era exit she discovered when renovating the shop. But as they were about to escape, the warrior stopped. Through gestures and the few English words it had learned, Vexthor explained something terrible. The hostile cracks weren't just planning war. They were planning to use the chaos to steal something sacred from Earth, something they'd lost generations ago. They were after coffee. All of it. The sacred drink that had been lost to their civilization was coffee, and the war faction wanted Earth's entire supply. Sarah looked at her wall of carefully sourced coffee beans from around the world. She thought about all the small farmers she bought from, the communities that depended on coffee cultivation. She turned to Vexthor. "Your people lost coffee once," she said slowly, "and it led to division in your society. Now the war faction wants to do the same thing to us." Vexthor nodded solemnly. Outside, the crowd was growing larger. The military was trying to control the situation. Somewhere in Central Park, red armored cracks warriors were closing in on what they thought was their prize. Sarah took a deep breath, smelling the coffee that had accidentally become the center of an intergalactic crisis. She had another crazy plan. One that would either save two worlds or get her banned from ever selling coffee again. "Vexthor," she said, "how do you feel about becoming a social media influencer?" Sarah's social media plan was already working better than she'd expected. #Vekalian art was trending worldwide, and angry New Yorkers were staging anti-corporate protests near every suspected crack ship. The war faction couldn't tell the protesters apart from potential threats, and the military was too busy managing the crowds to search effectively. But now came the dangerous part of her plan. Sarah stood in her basement, phone in one hand, setting up a live stream while Vexthor helped her arrange her shop's rarest coffee beans in a strange pattern on the floor. "Ready?" she asked. Vexthor nodded, then carefully placed the glowing peace cube in the center of the bean pattern. The moment it touched the coffee beans, something extraordinary happened. The beans began to float. Sarah's livestream viewer count exploded. "Hello everyone," she said to the camera, trying to keep her voice steady. "Today we're going to learn the real truth about coffee and aliens." Vexthor stepped into frame, all four eyes glowing gold, and began a series of graceful movements. The floating coffee beans danced in response, creating shapes in the air, star maps, ancient symbols, and finally, a detailed image of Earth from thousands of years ago. The translator crystal, seemingly recharged by its proximity to the peace cube, spoke with a clarity it hadn't had before. 12,000 Earth years ago, my people came here. Vexthor's words echoed through the translator. We were researchers, scientists, explorers. We found a planet rich with life, but one plant captured our attention more than any other. The floating beans formed the shape of a coffee plant. This simple plant contained compounds that enhanced our mental abilities, brought harmony to our warrior nature. We worked with early humans, teaching them cultivation secrets in exchange for the drink they helped us perfect. The beans shifted again, showing ancient human figures and cracks working together around what looked like primitive coffee farms. But a great catastrophe forced us to leave Earth suddenly. We lost the coordinates, the exact location of this world in the vast galaxy. We lost coffee. Sarah's viewer count was now in the millions. The floating coffee beans showed scenes of conflict, of cracked society dividing into factions. Without the sacred drink, some of our people turned to aggression, conquest. The peace faction never stopped searching for Earth, for the drink that once united us. The war faction. Vexthor paused, all four eyes showing different emotions. They want to take it by force, hoard it, control our people through its power. Suddenly, the basement door burst open. Red armored cracks warriors filled the stairway, weapons raised. But they froze at the sight of the floating beans, the ancient symbols. Lies. One of them roared in perfect English, clearly having a better translator. The humans are too primitive to be the ones who helped forge our ancient culture. They must have stolen the sacred drink from more worthy beings. Sarah looked at her phone's live stream comments. Millions of people were watching, including historians and archaeologists who were frantically posting links to ancient cave paintings, mysterious structures, and artifacts that had puzzled them for years, all showing tall, four-eyed figures working alongside humans. Then she noticed something else in her viewers list. Human_security_council had joined the stream. Sarah took a deep breath and did something either very brave or very stupid. She walked straight up to the angry red-armored cracks leader, pulled out a bag of coffee beans, and started brewing coffee right there in the basement. "You want proof?" she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Watch." She prepared 2 cups of coffee using her most precise brewing method. One for herself, one for the war faction leader. "In my culture," she said, holding out the cup, "sharing coffee is a sign of respect, of willingness to talk. If I was lying, would I risk sharing our most sacred drink with you?" The war faction leader's 4 eyes narrowed at the cup, then at the millions watching on livestream, then at the ancient star maps still floating in coffee beans above them. Very slowly, the massive alien warrior reached for the cup. What happened next would be debated by historians, scientists, and baristas for generations to come. The moment the war faction leader tasted the coffee, all 4 eyes began to glow gold, just like Vexthor's had. But something else happened too. The peace cube suddenly projected a hologram of what looked like a contract, written in both cracked symbols and ancient human pictographs. A treaty from 12,000 years ago, promising that coffee would always be shared freely between both species. The first treaty, Vexthor whispered. The lost proof we've been searching for. Sarah looked around her basement. A dozen heavily armed Cracks warriors were now all staring longingly at her coffee brewing setup. The livestream chat was exploding with questions. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear military boots. She turned to the war faction leader, who was still staring in wonder at the empty coffee cup. So, Sarah said, already reaching for more beans, who'd like to learn how to make a proper latte? Sarah's basement had become the strangest coffee class in history. 6 Cracks warriors from the war faction sat cross-legged on the floor, breaking 3 floorboards in the process, watching intently as she demonstrated the perfect pour-over technique. Their weapons lay forgotten in the corner, replaced by coffee cups that looked tiny in their massive hands. The livestream count had reached 1 billion viewers. #CoffeeAliens was trending in every country. World leaders were frantically calling each other, while coffee farmers worldwide were posting videos of ancient structures on their lands that looked suspiciously like Cracks architecture. The key, Sarah explained to both her alien students and the watching world, is water temperature. Too hot, and you burn the beans. Too cold, and the sacred essence sleeps. The war faction leader finished, earning surprised looks from everyone. What? I studied the ancient texts. But their coffee class was interrupted by a new sound from above. The entire building shook as something massive landed on the street outside. Through the basement windows, they could see enormous armored legs. The war faction's mothership had arrived. The war leader's translator boomed. Supreme Commander Valthak approaches. He will not be as easily swayed by your coffee diplomacy, tiny human. Sarah's phone buzzed. The president was trying to call. So were 3 different morning show hosts. Your commander, Sarah said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. Does he know about the first treaty we just discovered? Valthak destroys treaties, Vexthor spoke up. He believes strength is the only law. The basement door burst open again. This time, it was a mix of human military and suited government officials. One of them stepped forward, looking nervously at the gathered aliens. Ms. Chen, I'm from the State Department. You've started an interstellar incident. Actually, Sarah corrected, holding up her phone. I started an interstellar Instagram account. She turned the screen to show them. At Cosmic Coffee Corner had already gained 50 million followers. Every major coffee company in the world was trying to partner with her. The building shook again. Supreme Commander Valthak was entering the coffee shop above. Then Sarah noticed something interesting. The war faction warriors weren't reaching for their weapons. Instead, they were protectively gathering around her coffee brewing equipment. Several were actually taking notes on proper grinding techniques. The first treaty must be honored, the war leader said suddenly, standing up to tower over the government officials. We cannot let Valthak destroy 12,000 years of coffee heritage. Sarah had an idea. She quickly pulled up the coffee shop's security camera feed on her phone. Above them, Supreme Commander Valthak, nearly twice the size of regular Cracks warriors, was examining her shop's coffee roaster with obvious disgust. Your ancestors, Sarah said to the gathered warriors, they didn't just drink coffee. They were baristas. Look at these ancient symbols we found. They're not just random patterns. They're coffee farm layouts, roasting instructions, brewing ratios. She pointed to specific patterns in the still-floating coffee beans. Your entire warrior meditation ritual. It's based on the movements of hand-grinding coffee beans. The war faction warriors looked at their hands in shock, finally understanding why they had exactly the right number of fingers to operate a manual coffee grinder. Suddenly, the ceiling creaked. Supreme Commander Valthak's voice boomed through the floor. Find ye human who dares spread these lies about our warrior heritage. Sarah looked at her phone. The livestream comments were going crazy. Coffee shops around the world were posting their security feeds, showing cracked ships landing and warriors demanding not to attack, but to learn proper espresso techniques. The war leader stood up, straightening to full height. Supreme Commander Valthak cannot deny the truth if he tastes it himself. All four eyes turned to Sarah. But it must be perfect. The best coffee ever made. Sarah looked at her brewing equipment, then at her phone showing Valthak destroying her shop above, then of the government officials still frozen by the door. She thought about everything she'd learned about coffee over the years, about patience and precision, and bringing people together. I'll need help, she said, from all of you. What happened next would become known as the Great Coffee Collaboration. Red armored warriors carefully measured water temperature. Human soldiers ground beans to exact specifications. Government officials monitored brewing times. Vexthor's peace cube hovered over the brew, its energy somehow making the coffee's aroma even more potent. As they worked, Sarah went live on her phone one more time. Today, we're going to make the most important cup of coffee in human history, and we're going to need everyone's help. Every barista watching, every coffee lover out there, send us your best brewing tips. Because this cup of coffee, it's not just going to save my shop, it's going to save two worlds. Above them, Valthak roared in anger, making dust fall from the ceiling into their careful brew. Sarah calmly picked up a filter and said something that would soon be printed on t-shirts worldwide. In coffee we trust, in peace we brew. The perfect cup of coffee requires exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds of steeping time. As Sarah watched the timer on her phone, she realized that's also exactly how long it took Supreme Commander Valthak to reach the basement door, his footsteps making the whole building shake like a coffee grinder on maximum power. The livestream count had hit 2 billion. #CoffeeWarriors was trending in 182 countries. Coffee shops worldwide were live streaming their own brewing attempts, synchronized with Sarah's timer. 10 seconds left, Sarah announced to both her immediate audience and the watching world. The government officials had their phones out, recording. The human soldiers had their hands on their weapons. The war faction warriors were taking artistic photos of the brewing process for their newly created Instagram accounts. Valthak's massive form filled the doorway just as Sarah lifted the filter. The Supreme Commander was enormous, with 6 eyes instead of 4, and armor that looked like it was made from the metal of 1,000 conquered worlds. This is the human who claims our warrior heritage came from beverage preparation. His voice made the coffee in the cup ripple. Sarah didn't flinch. She dealt with grumpy customers before their morning coffee plenty of times. Your warriors, she said calmly, have already accepted the truth. She gestured to the war faction members, who were now wearing makeshift barista aprons made from military gear. But you don't have to take their word for it. She lifted the cup. The peace cube's energy had given the coffee an ethereal glow. The ancient bean patterns still floating in the air seemed to pulse in sync with its steam. Prove me wrong, Sarah challenged. Taste it. If I'm lying about coffee being part of your heritage, surely you won't feel anything special. Valthak's 6 eyes narrowed. You dare challenge me to Krathar? Everyone gasped. The translators explained. Krathar was an ancient cracks ritual of truth. If Sarah's coffee didn't prove her claims, she would face combat with the Supreme Commander. I accept, Sarah said, surprising everyone. But with one condition. We use these. She pulled out her secret weapon, a set of antique coffee bean grinders handed down through generations of her family. They were made of brass and wood, with intricate patterns that, she now realized, matched the ones on Crack's ceremonial armor perfectly. Valthak's eyes widened. The sacred grinding cylinders of truth. We thought they were lost forever. They're called manual coffee grinders, Sarah corrected. And if I win, you have to try my coffee. If you win, she gestured to her shop above, you get my entire coffee supply and all my recipes. The Supreme Commander reached for one of the grinders. The moment his massive hand touched it, something extraordinary happened. The grinder's patterns began to glow with the same energy as the peace cube. What followed was the most intense coffee bean grinding competition in human history. Sarah's movements were precise, practiced, perfect. Each turn of the grinder a meditation in coffee crafting. Valthak's warrior strength was impressive, but his grinding was erratic, untrained. The floating coffee beans formed a scoreboard. Sarah's grounds were achieving perfect consistency. Valthak's weren't. Finally, Sarah held up her perfectly ground beans. This is your heritage, she said. Not just war and conquest, but the art of bringing people together. Every bean tells that story. She pointed to her phone, showing live streams from around the world. Crack's warriors and human baristas were working together in coffee shops across the planet. Ancient Crack's coffee brewing techniques were being rediscovered. Someone had already created a Crack's kino that was going viral. Valthak stared at his unevenly ground beans, then at the antique grinder in his hands. Slowly, all 6 of his eyes began to glow, not with anger, but with recognition. I remember, he said softly. My ancestors' memories, passed down through our DNA. They weren't battle stances. They were barista training positions. Sarah finished. She held out the cup of coffee she'd brewed. Welcome home, Supreme Commander. Valthak took the cup. It looked comically small in his massive hands. The entire world held its breath as he took a sip. The effect was immediate and stunning. All 6 eyes blazed gold. The peace cube erupted with light. Every coffee bean in the room began to float. And Supreme Commander Valthak, the most feared warrior in the galaxy, did something he hadn't done in centuries. He smiled. Not bad, he said, but your crema needs work. The basement erupted in laughter. Phones buzzed as news alerts went out. Coffee HFY's world peace. The UN was already drafting a new version of the first treaty, establishing Earth as the galaxy's premier coffee supplier and cultural center. Sarah looked around her basement. Human soldiers and Crack's warriors were exchanging coffee brewing tips. Government officials were planning the first intergalactic coffee festival. Her phone was blowing up with franchise offers. But most importantly, Supreme Commander Valthak was asking her to teach him how to make a proper cappuccino. One last thing, Sarah said, addressing the still live-streaming audience. Everyone who posted angry comments about the fake alien art installation in Central Park. The joke's on you. It really was just modern art. The actual Crack ships were cloaked the whole time. As the internet exploded with this revelation, Sarah turned back to her newest student. Now, about that crema. And that's how Sarah Chen's Coffee Corner became the most famous coffee shop in 2 civilizations, all because she decided not to run when a bleeding alien warrior walked in. Some people say it was luck. Others say it was destiny. But ask any barista in the galaxy, and they'll tell you the truth. It was just really, really good coffee.